The whispers began the moment Lady Cordelia Ashworth stepped into the Duke of Blackmoor's fortress. The servants wouldn't meet her eyes. The housekeeper's hands trembled as she lit the candles in the drafty corridor. Even the portraits on the walls seemed to watch her with pity, their painted faces frozen in warnings she couldn't decipher. They called him the Savage Duke, a man who had buried 2 wives already, whose rage could shake the very foundations of his ancestral home, whose cold heart had turned to stone after years of war. And now, Cordelia had just signed away her life to become his 3rd bride. But she hadn't done it for love or money or status. She had done it for Charlotte, her younger sister. Sweet Charlotte, with her gentle laugh and dreams of marrying the vicar's son, had been the one promised to the Duke. Their father, drowning in gambling debts and desperation, had sold Charlotte's future to the highest bidder without a second thought. Cordelia could still see her sister's face when she learned the news, the color draining from her cheeks, her small hands clutching at Cordelia's sleeve like a drowning person grasping for a lifeline. "Please," Charlotte had whispered that night, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Delia, I can't. They say he's a monster." They say his last wife died trying to escape him. So Cordelia had walked into their father's study with her chin held high and made him an offer he couldn't refuse. She would marry the Duke instead. She was older, stronger, and she had already resigned herself to spinsterhood at 24. Charlotte could keep her dreams. Cordelia would face the nightmare. Now, standing in the great hall of Blackmoor Manor as thunder rolled across the moors, Cordelia wondered if she had been a fool. The Duke hadn't even attended their wedding ceremony. He'd sent a proxy, as if she weren't worth his time. She had married a shadow, a reputation, a ghost story told to frighten children. "His Grace will see you in the library," the housekeeper finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "3rd door on the left, and my lady?" The woman's eyes finally met hers, swimming with something that looked like sympathy. "Don't believe everything you hear." Cordelia's heart hammered against her ribs as she made her way down the corridor. Her wedding dress, a simple cream gown she'd worn because her family could afford nothing better, felt suddenly too tight. Each step echoed in the silence. When she reached the library door, she pressed her palm against the wood, took a breath that burned in her lungs and pushed it open. The man standing by the window was not what she expected. He was tall, yes, and broad-shouldered in a way that spoke of military training. His dark hair was slightly too long, touching his collar. But when he turned to face her, Cordelia found herself looking not at a monster, but at a man whose eyes held a weariness that seemed to reach into his very soul. There was a scar along his jaw, old, faded, and his hands, she noticed, were trembling slightly before he clasped them behind his back. "Lady Cordelia," he said, and his voice was rough as if unused to speaking. "You should not be here. I believe I have every right to be here, Your Grace. I am your wife." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Is that what they told you? That you had to sacrifice yourself?" He turned back to the window, his shoulders tense. "Your sister was the one promised to me." "Not you. Charlotte is 18. She's in love with someone else. I couldn't let her." "So you thought you'd be the lamb to the slaughter instead." He spun around, and for a moment, anger flashed in his eyes, not at her, she realized, but at the situation. "Do you have any idea what they say about me? What they think I am?" "I know what they say," Cordelia said quietly. "But I also know that my sister deserves a chance at happiness. If my being here gives her that chance, then I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Something shifted in his expression. The anger drained away, replaced by something that looked almost like pain. "You don't understand," he said softly. "I married my first wife because it was expected. She was terrified of me from the first day. She died in childbirth a year later, both she and the babe. My second wife," he paused, his jaw clenching. "She was in love with another man. She tried to run away to be with him. Her horse threw her on the road. They said I drove her to it, that my cruelty made her desperate." "Did you?" Cordelia asked, surprising herself with her boldness. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the truth written plainly on his face. "I gave her everything she asked for. Freedom to do as she pleased, separate chambers, no expectations of intimacy. I thought if I gave her space, she might at least be content. Instead, she saw my distance as coldness, my respect for her privacy as indifference. When she died, the rumors said I'd killed her, that I'd discovered her affair and murdered her in a rage. But you didn't. No. His voice cracked on the word. I was in London when it happened. I got the news by messenger, and when I came home, the servants looked at me like I was a murderer. The villagers crossed themselves when I passed. I became the monster they wanted me to be. It was easier than trying to convince them otherwise. Cordelia took a step forward. Why didn't you refuse when my father offered Charlotte? Why agree to another marriage? Because your father threatened to send her to Lord Pemberton, instead if I declined. He said it quietly, and Cordelia's blood ran cold. Pemberton was notorious, a truly cruel man whose last 3 wives had died under suspicious circumstances. I thought if she married me, at least she would be safe. At least she would have a chance. I never imagined. He gestured at her helplessly. I never imagined you. In that moment, standing in the fading light of the library, Cordelia saw the Duke of Blackmoor not as the monster from the rumors, but as a man who had been trying, in his own broken way, to do something good. A man who had agreed to a loveless marriage to save a girl he'd never met from a worse fate. A man who had shouldered a terrible reputation rather than drag his dead wives' names through the mud by revealing their unhappiness. What was your plan? She asked softly. If Charlotte had come. To give her the same I gave the others. Freedom, safety, a separate life. If she wanted it. I know what it's like to be trapped, Lady Cordelia. I spent 3 years in a prisoner of war camp during the war. I wouldn't wish that feeling on anyone. The confession hung in the air between them. Cordelia thought of her sister, safe at home now, probably dancing with the vicar's son in the garden. She thought of her father, counting the Duke's money and caring nothing for who paid the price. And she thought of this man, this so-called savage, who had been trying to save people and been vilified for it. My name is Cordelia, she said finally. Just Cordelia. And I don't believe you're a monster. His eyes widened slightly. You don't even know me. No, she agreed. But I know that a true monster wouldn't have tried to save Charlotte. A true monster wouldn't have given his wives freedom. A true monster wouldn't be standing here explaining himself to me when he could simply order me to my chambers and be done with it. She took another step closer. I know that I came here prepared to hate you, to endure you, to survive you. But now, I think perhaps we've both been victims of circumstances beyond our control. What are you proposing? His voice was wary, but there was something else there, too. A tiny spark of hope, fragile as a candle flame in the wind. I'm proposing that we start over. Not as the savage duke and the sacrificial bride, but as 2 people trying to make the best of a difficult situation. I'm proposing honesty, kindness if we can manage it, and perhaps in time friendship. He stared at her for a long moment, and Cordelia watched a lifetime of loneliness and pain, war with cautious hope in his eyes. Finally, he extended his hand. Marcus, he said quietly. My name is Marcus. She placed her hand in his, and his fingers closed around hers gently, as if she were something precious that might break. Hello, Marcus. I'm pleased to meet you. Over the following months, Blackmoor Manor transformed. It started small, Cordelia joining Marcus for breakfast, then dinner. Conversations about books and philosophy that stretched late into the evening. Marcus teaching her to ride the wilder horses that no one else could manage. Cordelia convincing him to attend the village fair, where she watched the townspeople's. Suspicion slowly turned to confusion as they saw their Duke laughing at a puppet show. The servants noticed too. They saw the way his Grace's face would light up when Lady Cordelia entered a room. They heard her laughter echoing through halls that had been silent for years. They watched as Marcus opened up, bit by bit, revealing the thoughtful, kind man he'd always been beneath the armor of his reputation. Charlotte visited for Christmas, and Cordelia had never felt such joy as watching her sister dance at the holiday ball. Engaged to her vicar's son, her eyes shining with happiness. You saved me, Charlotte whispered as they embraced. I can never thank you enough. But as Cordelia looked across the ballroom to where Marcus stood, watching her with a soft smile that made her heart skip, she realized that perhaps they had saved each other. She had given him the one thing no one else had, a chance to be seen for who he truly was, and he had given her something she'd never expected. a home, a purpose and a love she'd never dared to dream of. Later that night, as they stood together on the terrace watching snow fall over the moors, Marcus took her hand. "I never thought I'd be grateful for your father's gambling debts," he said with a slight smile. "But you came into my life like a light in the darkness, Cordelia. You saw past the monster to the man. How can I ever thank you for that?" Cordelia squeezed his hand, feeling the steady warmth of him beside her. "You can thank me by believing what I see. Not the savage they made you out to be, but the man who tried to save strangers. The man who gave me kindness when he had every reason to be bitter. The man I'm falling in love with." His breath caught, and when he turned to her, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I don't deserve you. Maybe not," she said with a smile. "But you're stuck with me anyway. That's what happens when you marry someone, even by proxy." He laughed then, a real laugh that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside, and pulled her into his arms. Around them, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Blackmoor Manor in white, covering the old stories and the dark rumors, giving them a fresh start. Sometimes, Cordelia thought as she rested her head against Marcus's chest, the greatest act of humanity isn't grand gestures or heroic deeds. Sometimes it's simply choosing to see the good in someone when the whole world has decided they're beyond redemption. Sometimes it's being willing to sacrifice yourself, only to discover that in doing so, you found something far more precious than what you gave up. She had married the savage Duke to save her sister. But behind closed doors, she'd found not a monster, but a man worth saving himself, and in saving him, she had found a love story more beautiful than any she could have imagined. And that, she thought as Marcus pressed a kiss to her forehead, was worth every whisper, every fear, and every risk she'd taken to get here.